Hello, friends. Hello, friends. A tradition unlike any other.
Oh, my goodness. In your life, have you seen anything like that?
There it is! Adam Scott, a life changer.
Mashed potato!
Here it comes.
The team at Cobra Golf are set to introduce additions to its collection of King putters, making the offerings available in a sleek black colourway, the perfect complement to the limited edition black LTDX drivers and King black wedges. The lineup of black putters includes both King 3D printed and King Vintage Series models, along with two new mallet styles, the King Cuda and Cuda 40. All King Collection putters come standard with the Cobra Super Stroke Traction Tour 2.0 grip and KBS Tour 120 shaft. The new additions to the King 3D printed and Vintage series will be available from July this year. For more information on the entire King family of products, visit cobragolf.com. This is the 19th tee. Kieran Marsh, Nathan Drudy back with you in Major Week. Drew, it's a pleasure to have your company as always as we stare down the barrel of one of the four major men's tournaments of the calendar year.
Yes, pleased to be back. Another major. Always a highlight on the calendar because we get to dive a little bit deeper and put our tips forward. I think that's my favourite part, where we make some predictions for a change instead of talking about what has happened.
We do speak, of course, of the 123rd US Open set to get underway Thursday American time, late Thursday evening Australian time, the North Course, Los Angeles Country Club. We'll get to that in just a moment, but speaking off air, as they say in the biz, before we hit the record button, we flagged it would be remiss of us not to just briefly mention the episode we did with our good friend Jimmy Emanuel on the news of the merger between the PGA Tour and the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. Seems like 5 years ago, Drew, at this point in time, because so much has happened in that space in the time since. And we do intend probably next week to maybe just sit down again and do a bit of a where we at type podcast. We do feel it's relevant to wait that amount of time, not only to give one of the four majors its right focus, but also because things are changing literally by the day. So it would almost seem redundant to do something now, given we could be in an entirely new place literally 7 days from now. But just to briefly recap on what we know has happened in the time since we first spoke about it with Jimmy Emanuel. We know that Jimmy Dunn, who's one of the power brokers from the PGA Tour side, who is the man who, in fact, informed Rory McIlroy of the deal about 3 hours out from the announcement on CNBC, and one of the board members of this new company, yet to be named. We know Jimmy Dunn went on the record publicly to say that essentially the PGA Tour were in a position of strength, that they struck while the iron was hot, and that they will be the controlling voice in this moving forward. Did his very best to dissuade the notion that the PGA Tour had sold golf to Saudi Arabia. Not concurrently, it certainly wasn't happening at the same time, but very similar timeline. Jay Monahan was addressing PGA Tour staff internally, walking them through a town hall, if you like. I'm sure many of our listeners who work in organisations around the country have these sorts of town halls with their CEO or similar other. And Jay addressing the staff at PGA Tour headquarters suggested, by way of a number of reports that have leaked in the time since, that the model of the elevated event purses combined with the legal fees that they were bleeding was unsustainable financially for the PGA Tour, and that this was a necessary move to ensure the future of the PGA Tour. So those two things are at loggerheads.
Yes.
You've got one power broker saying it was a position of strength. You've got the PGA Tour current CEO and the CEO of this new company saying it was out of necessity, essentially. Marry that up with the fact you've got players from both sides of the equation, so players who have remained on the PGA Tour, as well as players who've moved to live, turning up at the LA Country Club in the last 24 to 48 hours doing pre-tournament media, echoing the same sentiment. And that is essentially, we have no idea what is going on. We've not been informed. We've not been communicated with since. We have zero, like, we know as much as what you guys do. In fact, you in the media probably know more than what we do. And that's been said by Cam Smith on the live side, Joaquin Neiman on the live side, Matt Fitzpatrick, on the PGA Tour side, the consistent message to the players is we are in the dark.
Yes.
And then the last little piece I think is worth mentioning is that literally in the last 12 hours, there has been, and we're recording this on Tuesday evening Australian time, there has been a US Senate investigation launched by Senator Richard Blumenthal, who is a Democratic senator from Connecticut, and he has launched a Senate investigation into the legality of this new merger between the parties, which my understanding of Senate inquiries and Senate investigations and the powers that they yield doesn't spell great news for either side, I wouldn't have thought. So just wanted to flag that. Don't want to take really any attention away from the US Open, but just wanted to flag it to say we're not heads in the sand. We didn't record an episode last week and forget that this thing is on or don't care, nor do we think it's appropriate to continue to update you on a 48-hour periodical basis because things are moving. And so we want to give it time enough to breathe. But that should illustrate to you that literally in the 5 or 6 days since, so much has already happened. We said it last week. We're so early in this, Druids, and there's plenty of water to run under the bridge. But remarkable scenes as we head into the third men's major of the year.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that has happened, and there's so much that's still to come in all of it. I mean, I think that the biggest thing at the minute is there is so much conflicting information out there. There's so much information just in general out there. So it's hard to know actually what to believe and what not to believe. A lot of the stuff that has come out in terms of, if the PGA Tour was in financial trouble in terms of the court proceedings and the elevated purses that you mentioned there, goes in the face of everything that Joe Monahan said for 18 months of, that we are in a very strong financial position. We can do this. We've got the money. Goes in the face of Phil Mickelson believing that they were sitting on $20 billion of royalties, the NFTs, going back 2 years. There's just so much conflicting information. And I think, to use your point there, we are so very early in this and it will continue to be a dominating talking point in the golfing world. I know it's crazy that we are in a men's major week and still the most common narrative is around this merger. And I think, that's obviously it's the biggest story, arguably in the history of golf in terms of it's going to shape the next frontier of what men's professional golf looks like. So it's rightfully getting the attention. But in a major week, there's always just a little tinge of sadness that we and the golf media have so much attention on it when really we should be talking about the US Open and what's going to be a fantastic tournament. And hopefully the golf media who drive the narrative will focus on the golf for this week, which would be nice because I can't deal with any more information on my Twitter feed about this because every second tweet is contradictory to the tweet that's just above it. So it's hard to know what to believe, Marshy.
So we will revert back to it next week, but I think that's enough for now.
Yep.
Let's talk shop. Let's talk about what should be our focus for this week, and that is, as I said, the 123rd US Men's Open Championship from the North Course at the LA Country Club. Druids, there's so much to cover this evening, not least of which running through the 7 Australians in the field, not least of which running through our tips, as we generally do, around a preview, not least of which getting your weather report, which I know most people who tune into these major previews, it is the blue ribboned section of the major previews, is the long-range weather forecast. But where I want to start is the course itself, because you and I, as we generally do, had a brief chat before hitting the record button, and I said to you, which you fervently agreed with by a rigorous nodding of your head, I said I'm as excited for this major as I have been probably since Kiawah. And that is down to the quirkiness of the course. So if you take out Augusta, where we play every year, and you accept the fact widely that the Open Championship is my second and potentially your favourite major championship of the year because of the style of golf we get in the United Kingdom, really then my level of engagement revolves around the challenge presented by the course or the host venue for PGA Championships and US Opens. And what we are served this week, in my humble opinion, will present, I think, one of the more memorable championships, at least in the time that we've been recording this podcast, and probably in my time supporting golf. And I say that without a ball being hit in earnest, and I say that purely by taking a look at the North Course of the LA Country Club. Just your immediate thoughts on where we're at in terms of lobbing into 300 acres in Midwest Los Angeles, some of the most prime golfing real estate literally on the planet.
Well, I think it's some of the most prime real estate more broadly. I'm sure there's some developer out there that would like to bowl this over and put apartments on it and expand LA even more than what it is already expanded. No, I think you're right. I did have a good look at this course, and it was hard because it kind of leads into the tips as well, that it was hard to kind of get a read on what or who is going to play well here, because there hasn't been a tournament here since World War II times, right? So we're going in blind. Here's what we're doing. But I think when you look back at some of the courses that US Opens have hosted in the past couple of years, the Country Club Brookline was great, and we really enjoyed going there. I think Torrey we obviously see every year anyway because it's on the rota for the PGA Tour. Winged Foot was one that I remember we did a deep dive into and enjoyed that history. And then going back to Pebble, which we've discussed as well, Shinnecock, I think, is one that stands out. So in the last 5 years, there's really only one of those courses that you can go, wow, this is, I don't know a lot about this, but this, you can see that this is going to be a very, very interesting and tough course. And I think LA Country Club can now fit into that category alongside Shinnecock as one that I'm probably looking forward to more than most. There's been some great stuff out on YouTube. As you mentioned, you've probably digested more of it than I have. I've seen bits and pieces and did a bit of research a little while back on LA Country Club. But I think the challenge that it presents some of the players is going to be a lot different to what perhaps normal US Opens present in terms that they may not just be able to step up and bully it. It's going to be fascinating watch to see who can pick it apart the best, because I think that's the person who's going to win it, is the person who's able to strategically stand on a tee box and be dictated to by pin position, and then how do I get my ball in that hole as quickly as possible in some cases and just get the fuck out of there, because that is, par is almost irrelevant in a lot of these things. So the course itself, I mean, I don't want to do an 18-hole run through. I mean, we absolutely could, because there's some amazing holes on there. I think the stretch, for me, I wrote some notes down on this throughout the last little while, knowing that this was coming up. I think that the stretch of 5 through 7 is one that I'm really looking forward to. Big sloping fairways. 6 is obviously just a bizarre hole that, probably if it was designed this time, people would lose their minds, right? Like, I consider that almost... yeah.
I was just going to say, but 6 may be the most unique golf hole we've seen in men's major championships since some time.
Yeah.
It is unlike anything. So there'll be a bunch of people who listen to this who will seek content out prior.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned some of the stuff that I've watched. I'd highly recommend. There's a great video by Golf Digest, voiced over by their architect, editor, that goes hole by hole with flyovers. It's excellent. The Fried Egg have done a similar piece on their YouTube channel. I'd highly recommend. I've found it beneficial the last couple of major championships away from Augusta, because I find it enhances my viewing experience to take a little bit of a look at the course prior. For the people who go in blind, I also am a little envious of you, because you will lay your eyes on 6 for the first time and think, what am I looking at?
Mm-hmm.
Truly, what am I looking at here? So, yeah, 6 is a remarkable hole.
It reminds me a little of the Dell at La Hinch, just in the way that it's kind of set up. Like it's I mean, you can go for the green. There's no doubt you can absolutely go for the green, but you've got to be so precise. And if it's going to be as firm and fast as what everyone's sort of expecting, then I think you're probably going to have a fairly tough time trying to hold that green. So I think that sort of 5 through 7 range, I guess for me, is something that really excites me. And then of course, there's the 11th hole has got a lot of attention this week. I mean, there's been reports that it's going to play at 290 yards as a par 3, which is enormous. So I'm fascinated by what the LA Country Club is going to throw up. I think, I watched a little bit of content. I haven't watched those ones that you mentioned. I should have probably done that. That would have been good research. But I have seen people play it before on YouTube, and I am really interested to see how professionals and like the peak people in the game go about playing this. So yeah, fascinating for me.
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of things for me to pull apart there that you've kind of touched on. So I think first and foremost, normal rules don't necessarily apply in my mind this week. And I think that's why you alluded to it, and it certainly had an influence on my tips. Maybe a few of the data points that we'd often look at. I don't necessarily think you can transplant into the North Course, the LA Country Club simply. So that's fascinating in and of itself. I think there will be players, and I'm intrigued to see who falls inside this group. I think there will be players in the first few days who do try to bully the course. But I truly do believe that it will become a mind over matter. Pure brawn is not going to win this tournament. You are going to have to think your way through. And it's probably going to come down to the players that accept imperfection. Like you are going to hit good shots. So even if you're able to think your way through the challenges that it presents on face value, the head of the USGA has come out this morning and said, if we get the conditions to where we want it to be come Thursday morning US time, genuinely the ball will hit the ground in places on this property and you will not know where it will go. So you're going to have situations where you hit good shots and get punished. So I think it's going to come down to those who can accept that you're not always going to get the result you warranted. And scramble and play well at that point will really start to separate themselves. It is just such a unique property, Druids. There are countless shots, which we don't see an awful lot. We really never see on the PGA Tour a blind tee shot. We rarely see it in major championship golf as well. 7 of the 9 holes on the first 9 are littered with what they call, in local jargon, barrancas. We just refer to them as dry riverbeds that have been overgrown, with a little bit of flora, not fauna. There's no animals in there. It's just the flora. But they present a challenge because they are a genuine hazard. If they were purely dry, it's probably pretty easy to hit out of, but they are overgrown now. And they weed their way through 7 of the first 9 holes. You've got incredibly sloped fairways that you've referred to, literally like the ball will be completely below your feet or above it, depending on where you land. It's not a challenge that many of these players are presented with often. So the complete newness, for want of a better term, of people like, don't be surprised to see so many blokes get in there, which we've seen already, to get practice rounds under their belt because they haven't seen a challenge like this. Just a few little nuances around the course itself. So George Thomas was the original architect in the 20s. He has another 2 courses in the LA area for people who may know the Bel Air Country Club and one of our other favorites, Riviera, where they play the Genesis or the LA Open every single year. So that might give you, even Riviera, might give you a little bit of an Easter egg indication of what's to come at the LA Country Club. Most recently renovated by Gil Hance. That started in 2008. It was still going. Parts of it were going in the last year or two, but the most significant work, it was almost a complete reconstruction, 2009, 2010. So George Thomas, fairly handy. Gil Hance, arguably the best modern day architect of our time. It's the first time in 75 years we've been in LA for a US Open, which is remarkable. West Coast US Opens aren't uncommon. Torrey you've mentioned, Pebble you've mentioned, but the first time we've been in the second largest media market in the United States for 75 years for a US Open. The last one was 1948. Ben Hogan won at Riviera. It's also only the first, I think, the first US Open course with 5 par threes since 1947, I believe, which was at St. Louis. So just some unique stuff going on. There's 5 par threes, 5 par fives. There's just a lot happening that I think if you let yourself, if you can, because it's a tough watch, whether you're staying up late or getting up early, but really immerse yourself in these 4 days of this tournament, because I think it will be highly enjoyable from a viewing experience.
It will. It certainly will. And I think it's probably going to be a lot different in terms of major venues than what people might be expecting, because normally we see the very prim and proper venues. Even at the PGA, we kind of just saw it a little bit. But I think sort of just dovetailing into our tips a little here, but also on the course, really interestingly, this is not necessarily a putter's course. So you can be, I'm going to put in air quotations here, mediocre at putting. So I was looking today that the average ranking, strokes gained average ranking of winners in the last 4 years, they've been ranked 20th, 2021, which is really interesting because normally your strokes gained putting is a pretty good indication. Where it does highlight players, and players kind of highlight themselves, is strokes gained tee to green, ranking somewhere around 3 to 4. So that narrows the field down very quickly. There's no players that fit all of these, of course, but I think, that's a pretty interesting thing to note, that it's not all about the putting. And once you get to the greens, that players might sort of, the strokes gain differential might not be as wide as what we particularly see in normal majors, but getting the ball to the green, it's going to be fucking hard work. And that's going to be really interesting to watch for me, because a lot of balls are going to collect in very similar places. Wouldn't be surprised if there's lots of balls in other divots, other, ball marks, etc. So it's going to be a really fascinating one to watch. As I said, I'm looking forward to seeing how the pinnacle of golf, the golf players, actually go out and take this course on, because I've watched amateurs play it. We obviously play it very, very differently to how the professionals play it. So, yeah, I'm genuinely excited for this. I think, to your point at the top of the show, this is probably one that I've had circled for a little while, and I'm very, very much looking forward to it.
Just a few more tidbits on the course itself before we move probably into your weather forecast, because that'll be the most natural segue, I think. What makes it great in my mind is, and this is an opinion purely based on watching a couple of flyovers. I certainly haven't walked it or played it for that matter, but there's a lot of half par holes. And by that, I mean par fours that pay probably 4.5, or inversely fives that probably play 4.5, or even 5.5. And that is often the measure of a great course, because it forces decisions. And decisions that aren't often had to be made week in, week out on the PGA Tour. I think, and we'll kind of transition more into it when we get into our tips, but there's going to be a lot of players hitting clubs they're not used to hitting, plain and simple, which I think will be intriguing to watch. I'm also fascinated to see the Venn diagram of players who have said there's no need to roll back the ball, and the players who'll come out and complain about this course. Because to your point, there are holes like the 11th. Now, the sign says 290 yards. Reports from on the ground, the practice round looks like it's probably going to play more 250, 255. Still long for a par 3.
But can I just say
there's
that
going to be players.
I was just going to say, I actually really like that, because 290 almost stretches it out to like 3 wood territory. Like, I want to see guys hitting 3 irons into this. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'd rather that sort of 240, 250. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely right, because it's going to be harder to stop the ball, particularly if the conditions are where the USGA is trying to get them to. But I've got no doubt that there will be a great Venn diagram crossover of players we've seen at the forefront of the anti-rollback debate, and he'll say that some of these holes they've lost control of the course. It's too long. It's ridiculous, and I can't wait to watch that small group of players contradict themselves in the coming days. It's going to be something I look forward to a lot. I think there's a lot of stats that I've got here in front of me. I think I'll probably weave the remainder through the rest of the conversation around tips themselves. But I think probably just two more stats wise. So this is the 15th US Open and the 20th major played in the state of California. So as I mentioned, the first time in 75 years we're in LA, but playing West Coast US Opens is not uncommon. Of those 20th majors played in California, only foreigners to win. Northern Ireland's Graham McDowell, 2010 at Pebble Beach. John Rahm, 21 at Torrey. And our very own Steve Elkington, the 1995 PGA Championship at Riviera. So not sure if that's going to form or influence your tips, but it seems as though Americans do well at West Coast majors. The only other thing I wanted to flag, do you know who owns the course record of the North Course, the LA Country Club?
No, I actually don't.
It's a 61. It was set in 2013
Okay.
by Max Homa.
Right. Interesting. There you go.
Previously, it was a 62. Previously, a 62 set by Patrick Cantlay. So there's a couple of players in this field this week who play this course, at least historically, very, very well.
Yeah. But one of them's Patrick Cantlay, and he sucks. Just in general, sucks. Like,
anyway, just some interesting tidbits around the course.
Thank you.
I think I'm of the firm opinion, before we've even hit a ball in earnest in round one, that when we reflect on Monday evening, that we will have a champion, sure, but the winner of the 123rd US Open will be the North Course at the LA Country Club.
Yep, be very cool to watch. I'm pumped. I'm very pumped for this, Marshy. Very, very pumped. You want me to deliver my weather report now?
Please do.
It's short. It's benign. It's going to be very, very lame weather-wise. I got nothing to report. 21 to 23 across all 3 days. Very, very minimal chance of rain and winds around sort of 8 to 9 kilometers an hour. Going to be beautiful weather for major golf. I think that will help in terms of drying out the course. Well, not drying out, but drying out's the right word, and making it firmer and faster. So that'll be that's probably the perfect conditions that the USGA want here. So that is my weather report. There is nothing too much to report day by day, which is what normally happens here. So there you go. 21 to 23 across all 4 days.
That's good, mate. That's what we want. I mean, I think I kind of alluded to it at the beginning. The USGA certainly have a plan in mind for what they want to see. A couple of puzzle pieces have to fall in place. The weather is one of them. However, it appears as though they're going to.
Yes.
So that's good. Good news. Australians, maybe we should start there.
Yes.
In terms of Aussies in the field. So we've got 7, is my understanding.
Yes, we do.
And without referring to the sheet of paper, let me see if I can rattle them off.
I've got them here, so I'll tick them off. Go.
Wonderful. You'd suggest the contingent is led by, in terms of chances, is led by Cameron Smith. It's an interesting conversation, which I think we should have in a moment, only because you simply ponder for how much longer we will say that sentence, i.e. he leads the chances, based on previous results as opposed to current form. And as the superannuation funds say, Drew's past performance is not an indicator of future performance. So we'll bear that in mind as we move through. Smithy is joined by Adam Scott.
Yes.
That's 2. Jason Day.
Yes.
That's 3. Minwoo Lee.
Yes.
That's 4. Cameron Davis.
Yes.
That's 5. I know for a fact that Carl Phillips
yes
is in the field, the Stanford collegiate player who qualified via sectionals recently, which leaves me at 6 and potentially with a bit of egg on my face. Because
Lucas Herbert.
Of course. The ears.
Yes.
Herbie. Fantastic.
Yes.
Wonderful to see. So that's our Australian contingent.
Yes. Look, it's funny you say that past performance is not an indicator of future performance because I'm really hoping it is because that's kind of what I've based my tips off. I actually, we launched our competition, by the way, today as well, which is a nice segue here on Instagram. If you'd like to head over there, all you need to do is comment who you think will be the highest finishing Aussie, their score, and follow a couple of other instructions on there. That's thanks to our good friends at Oakley. So head over to that and do so. But I think I think this really sets up well for Minwoo Lee, personally, Marshy.
Okay.
It's
a conversation I'm happy to hear. Okay.
I just think his ball striking is so good. His iron play is so good. And given this, we didn't touch on it in the course part, but it's very wide. It is a very wide course. So I think the errors that may sneak into his game sometimes come on narrow courses. So I'm happy to take Minwoo Lee here. I think he's a really good option to be the top finishing Aussie.
What's the score? Because that is obviously half the competition is nominating not just the player, but also the score. Of course, closest to without going over is an important stipulation.
I've got him at even par. I think the winning score as well, if we want to bundle all of that in, I think the winning score, interestingly, the last 3 winning scores have been 6 under. So I think it's going to end up sort of around maybe somewhere between 4 and 7 this time. No idea. Genuine punt.
Okay.
Could be fucking 20 under.
I've got the win at 8 under. But you're saying Minwoo, the highest finishing Australian at even par. So I'm going to say, and I did notice we've had some entries already. We should say, because I'm just conscious of when people may be listening to this. We're recording this Tuesday evening. This will be released most likely Wednesday or Thursday. The competition has been launched Tuesday. So if you haven't already seen it and entered, make sure you do so before we have the first group off the tee, because that's when it becomes null and void. I did see one person, an eager beaver, jump in early and comment my tip for highest finishing Aussie, but I did notice I hadn't actually tagged a friend, which is a critical component. And so therefore, if we do pick the same score, I may in fact just keep the sunglasses because he hasn't tagged someone. But my tip is in fact Cameron Davis. So I really like what Cam Davis did at the PGA at Oak Hill. Truly, I did. I think the manner in which, I think it was a 5 under on Sunday, which that course was difficult, obviously made more difficult by the weather conditions the first 2 days, but he balled on the weekend, particularly on Sunday, to put himself in a T4, I think is where he finished that tournament. He's had another top 10 this year at the Players. So likes the big stage. Admittedly missed the cut at Augusta, which is not a great look. But, he does like the big stage and he likes a challenge. So I think, and I think that he doesn't necessarily jump out at you in any one category, which I don't think is a bad thing for this course because it's not asking a specific question of one area of your game. So I'm going to say Cam Davis and I'm going to say -1.
I like it. So neither of us are saying that the Aussies are getting anywhere near the top of the leaderboard.
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying. I think what we're saying is the Australians aren't winning the tournament. Not to say that I don't want them to. I think take it as read. But I just don't necessarily think, like on face value, you would suggest it suits the game we knew of Cameron Smith to play well. The Cameron Smith who won the Open Championship at St Andrews would love this course. I just don't know if that's the golf that Smithy's playing, mainly because I just don't know what golf he's playing at the moment. So I'm happy to be proven wrong, and I'd welcome that. I'd thrive, but I just think when there's so many other players in the world playing unreal golf, and then the ones that we don't see on a week-to-week basis, there's others, namely Brooks Koepka, who've bucked their heads in the first two majors of the year. I just find it hard to invest my emotional like time and emotional dollars into Smithy getting the job done. Outside of that, like J Day obviously has won recently, but I don't necessarily think this is for him. Scotty's probably the one that I think is maybe of most interest to me. I could mount a case for Scotty, particularly in the first 36 holes, being very competitive. So I'd be interested to see if that is if that comes to fruition. But I think for mine, Cam Davis will be the highest finishing Aussie. I do like your Minwoo Lee argument, though. Minwoo has played quite well so far in the majors that he's contested. Would be a big step for him to take, maybe into a top 10, top 5. But yeah, he's got the rounded game. It's whether it's the temperament and the consistency across 72 holes.
Agreed.
Just briefly, Druids, I just did want to mention, because I stumbled across this from Benny Everill, good friend of this podcast. Benny Everill tweeted early today, Tuesday time, so he's out walking the course, LA Country Club. Colin Swatton, who had previously been on the bag of Jason Day, he'd secured 5 US Open top 10s, including 2 runner-ups with Jason Day. He's carrying the sticks for Carl Phillips. So Aussie Carl, Koala Carl, has engaged the services of what has been a highly successful caddy on Jason Day's bag previously, and Colin Swatton. So that's a nice little touch, and it would be great to see. Obviously, Carl Phillips is certainly making waves at Stanford, as is that Stanford men's team. They've qualified a number of players as amateurs into this field this week, which is probably not unexpected given their proximity on the West Coast. But yeah, I'm excited to see Carl get his chance, and good to see him engage Colin Swatton there as a familiar face, certainly when it comes to US Opens.
Tips?
Yeah, where do you want to start? I think it's always good to start with who won't win. I think it's always good to balls to the wall. Let's just get it out there. Let's see how brave we've both been willing to be. I'm happy to start, Drews.
Please.
If you don't mind. So I'm of the firm opinion. So I'm not washy on this. I'm not half pregnant. I'm not 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I'm of the firm opinion that Scotty Scheffler will not win the 2023 US Men's Open, which is ironic, many would think, because he is in fact the betting favourite. Not that means a great deal, because I think in terms of the market, you've got to have one person as the shortest prize player. And at present, you could probably, throw a dart at himself, John Rahm, or Brooks Koepka. Brooks, of course, winning the most recent men's major. John Rahm having previously won a West Coast US Open. So, I think it could be any of the three. Scotty happens to be on top, which just suits my narrative better. But I don't believe he'll win, and I'll tell you why. I think 2 reasons. What I flagged earlier, in the sense that traditional data points, I don't think translate well to the LA Country Club. So there's no doubt that from a tee to green perspective, he is miles ahead of any other player at present. In fact, I stumbled across a stat from, I was about to call him my good friend. I think we would be if we met. He just doesn't know it. That's Kyle Porter. He's one of the best follows on golf Twitter, in my humble opinion. Top 10 players tee to green over the last 30 rounds. A minimum of 10 they would have had to have played to be measured. There's names in there like Pat Cantlay. He's second 2.2 strokes gained. Xander 2.1. John Rahm 2 flat. Rory 1.9. Hovland 1.9. Morikawa 1.8. Finau 1.7. Woodland 1.6. Russell Henley is a surprise inclusion in the top 10 there of strokes gained tee to green in their last 30 rounds at 1.5. But a clear leader. In fact, he's 1.2 strokes clear of second, let alone the remainder of the field. Scotty Scheffler is 3.4 strokes gained tee to green in his last 30 rounds heading into the US Open, which you'd say, you're mad, Marshy. What are you doing? Are you insane? Well, as I've previously stated, Scotty's going to have to hit shots here. Like, this isn't a course that he finds week in, week out. It's not the cookie cutter PGA Tour bomb and gouge. He's going to have to hit shots here he doesn't usually have to hit. And he's going to have to approach the green in a manner he doesn't usually approach the green. It's going to be above his feet. It's going to be below his feet. It's going to be, it might overrun the green into not rough with the wedge, but in fact, there's runoff areas with quite short grass. It's going to ask difficult questions to chip back from. All of that combined with the fact his putter is in the wilderness at the moment. So the reason why he's still in tournaments is because his approach game is so strong and he puts himself within a chance, even though he can't putt the backside off a barn at the moment. It gives himself a chance. Given the unique nature of this course, and yes, you mentioned putting isn't necessarily the most important part, but there's some funky green complexes in this joint as well. Like, if you get yourself into bad positions on the green, you could find yourself in a lot of trouble real early in this tournament. So I just think his putter's too far away in this tournament. If it was a regular course measured by regular standards, he'd be well within his rights to be a chance. But I just think the questions he's going to be asked from the fairway, combined with the lack of confidence with the flat stick at the moment, I do not think Scotty Scheffler is in a position to win this tournament.
All fair, all very fair, and very short as well at 750. If you ask me personally, I think that's far too short.
Thanks.
I think I don't want to get ahead of any tips here, but you mentioned John Rahm there. I'll give it away now that Rahm doesn't feature in any of my tips, but I'm just very wary of John Rahm. I'm just really wary of John Rahm.
I think you should be.
Because he's very good at creating shots. So I'm just very wary. Okay, my won't win. Rory McIlroy. Just too much going on. Just too much going on. As much as I'd love to see it, and I think potentially statistically could mount some of probably a decent case for it. I just think there might be too much going on with Rory, particularly, the role that he's having to play at the minute. Where I do think this course can suit Rory is his ability to shape and create shots. He's very inventive in the way that he plays, so that might suit him well. So I'm going to have Rory to not win at $13. I would argue again that I could have taken Patrick Cantlay at 17, who is on the fourth line of betting, and that's a very easy one for me. So, yeah, I'll have Rory here. I know that there's a lot of people who are saying that this whole situation might actually suit him and free him up a little bit, but yeah, I'm just think that it might be too much at this point in time. So, Rory for me.
Was going to be my question. You're not of the opinion that the events of the last week in some respects are liberating, and that he may in fact feel freed, or worse still, a little bit of fuck you, a little bit of, I'm going to go and win this despite all of what's happened. Let me just lay something on you. Lowest scoring averages in men's majors since the start of 2020, a minimum of 30 rounds. Scotty Scheffler at 69.93 after 46 rounds. John Rahm 70.38 after 52 rounds. Rory McIlroy 70.44 after 48 rounds. So Rory, the second most amount of rounds played in majors since the start of 2020. He's the third best scoring average, but the gap between he and the best in Scheffler is literally 0.5 of a stroke.
Yeah, and as I say, I think statistically this could potentially... Well, it sounds like it does line up really well for him, but I'm just think that perhaps everything that's going on. And I know it's liberating in a way, but he's still the spokesperson for the players, right? At the minute, he's still the one out there fighting the bullets. His press conference was hugely tuned into last week, and I can guarantee that any media that he does this week, there's going to be questions about the merger and stuff that's going on when all he wants to do is go out and play. There was an article today that said that him and Justin Rose said, we're not chatting on the course in our practice round. They just went out and played and said, we'll chat after. So, yeah, I'm happy to take Rory at 13. I mean, I'd love to see him win it, but I'll take Rory at 13. I'll hand back to you. We normally go will win, but go want to win here. Give me who you're rooting for.
Yeah. This was difficult in the sense that I kind of found if I put Scotty Scheffler to one side as won't win, I kind of found, and obviously my roughie at the other end of the spectrum, because I don't believe they're winning, but I think they're good value. I found the other two questions of will and want, like there's probably a list of 4 to 5 players considered and easily transferable between both categories.
Mm-hmm.
So this was difficult for mine, to be honest. And maybe the closest I've been to a player who could comfortably sit in the will as opposed to the want. But ultimately I'm going to go with John Rahm, which is a little bit of a cop out. Eager listeners of this podcast would suggest, given he was my want to win at the last major. If you recall, he obviously breaks through at the Masters. It's his second major of his career. We go to Oak Hill. I think it sets up really well for him. I suggest that in terms of his legacy, in terms of the momentum of going back to back, of elevating himself into a 3 major category, of where it places him, not just from a Spanish golfer's perspective, like he genuinely enters the conversation to rival Seve as the greatest Spanish golfer of all time, but it elevates him in the European conversation as well. And I think he's worthy of that. None of those reasons have changed for me. I just think, I also think this probably plays more into the will than the want, but he'll be disappointed with the way in which he has played since Augusta, particularly in the PGA Championship at Oak Hill. He was very disappointing, and nobody will be more acutely aware or disappointed than the man himself. So he remains one of my favorite players. I also don't know about you. When I say this firmly without my tongue in my cheek, when I look at this, I feel an obligation. There's plenty of people who I could say I want to win who just simply won't. So there's also an element of like, I want to be realistic, because I could sit here and say to you that I want Jordan Spieth to win.
Yeah.
I could sit here and say to you that I want Cameron Smith to win. I could even sit here and say to you that I want Ricky Fowler to win.
Yeah.
Because there's a part of me that would love to see Slick Dick Rick compete. And I actually do think parts of this course play well to Ricky Fowler. But ultimately, when I'm putting these tips down, there's got to be an element of, I think, plausibility.
Yes.
Around my want to win. And I genuinely believe that John Rahm is there. For the reasons that I outlined before in the scoring average, he's got second best behind Scotty Scheffler scoring average of men's majors since the beginning of 2020. He's also, of all players, the longest current streak of making the cut in major championships, having made 15 in a row. So he's going to be there on the weekend. And he could become only the second player alongside Tiger Woods to win more than one major in California if he gets the job done this weekend. So look, there's many things surrounding John, not least of which is my love for him as a player and seemingly as a person away from the course. So I would really like to see John Rahm win this tournament, Trudes.
As would I. And I'm wary of him, as I said. I'm
Yes.
wary of him. I just think that, he strikes the ball so well. He'll be able to compete with the distance that's going to be required. I think he's putting strong. I think he's a genuinely good chance to win this. He isn't my pick to win, but I think he has a very, very good chance. And to be honest, I'm actually a little intrigued as to why he's not favourite for this tournament. So I love it. I love the pick. I've gone along similar lines. I agree with you that I think we need to have some sense of realism about who's actually in the ballpark to win this event. So mine's a little different. I've gone for a player who I want to see elevate their game in the majors, and I would like to see them win their first major. So for that reason, I've gone Victor Hovland here. We've spoken about how his form's been good so far at the last handful of majors he's been competing, and now it's time to step up and win a tournament. Win a major tournament. So I think there are parts of this course that are going to scare Victor Hovland in a lot of ways. He's the short game, particularly if he's required around the greens to scramble, is that doesn't fill me with a lot of hope. But he's striking the ball arguably as good as anyone on the tour, has distance in spades. And again, like we said just last week when he won, that if he can produce something half decent with the flat stick, he's going to be at the top of the leaderboard. So I will have Victor Hovland as my want to win.
So, spoiler, and we may as well continue the conversation because he is my pick to win.
Okay, great.
So, and I want to put some additional context around that after I tell you why I think you'll win.
Mm-hmm.
Let me lay a stat on you that was probably the deciding factor for me.
Mm-hmm.
And as a data-driven man, you'll tell me I'm absurd and ridiculous and too emotional and superstitious. But 17, Druids, 17 of the past 23 US Open winners have in fact won their first major.
Great. Good to know.
In entering that conversation. So automatically, if you believe in that sort of thing, you've disqualified a whole bunch of people from winning this tournament. Automatically. But just bear that in mind going in, that 17 of the past 23 US Open winners have won their first major in winning that US Open. So there's a trend and there's a form line. I think if you look at, he is the best performing player in the last three majors. So per Justin Ray, 27 under in the last three majors contested, 7 shots better than any other player across that span. He's gaining 0.57 strokes around the green per round in that span, which flies in the face of his chipping woes. He's the 8th best player on that measure. He's found something, I think, with the putter. And he's just, like, we had this conversation with him when he won the Memorial. Like, he's genuinely, forget about world rankings, he's genuinely probably the 3rd best player in the world at the moment. I'd only put, this is hard, and it's based on what we see week in, week out. But I'd only put, at present, Scheffler and Rahm ahead of him. Maybe Brooks on par, but that's purely based on what I saw at the Masters and the PGA. I think as well, like the Masters, he was in the conversation to the back nine. PGA Championship, he was in the conversation through 70 holes. You know, he ejected himself with a double on 16 on Sunday. He's been right there. So this is not a quantum leap to get to being the person lifting a trophy at the end of Sunday.
Yeah.
I think it is time, absolutely, for him to step up. And I do get the sense that, I know I keep coming back to the course, but I think it may be a significant contributing factor to why he can separate himself. Because if we were just going back to another, question of length or your ability to gouge out of long rough, or then that brings him back to the field. That
Yep.
elevates players like Koepka, Rahm, McIlroy.
Yep.
But it's asking a different question, and a question that I think he has been answering a bit of late, albeit in different ways, through his numbers in the last probably 8 months. So
Agreed.
I think he's there. Who will win the tournament for you?
Well, as I said, past performance, future indicator, whatever that saying was, is not an indicator of future performance. I think this time I'm going to dip back in the well here on this one and go for a guy who went 4-0 at this course at the 2017 Walker Cup, and that's Colin Morikawa. I'm
Okay.
Given that we haven't seen this course at all in our lifetime, Marshy, I'm going to go with a guy who's actually played here and played incredibly well. Now, whether the Walker Cup is a good yardstick to measure by, I don't know. But I'm going to take the same formula that allowed me to pick Matty Fitzpatrick to win this tournament last year at a guy who did very well at Brookline and won previously at Brookline. I'm going to do the same and follow Colin Morikawa here. Ball striking, excellent. The fact that putting isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all here is something that I think is in his favour. And if he's able to produce just a skerrick of what he can do with the flat stick, then I think he'll be right up the top of the leaderboard. So at $31, I think it's exceptional value too, by the way. There's some players ahead of him that I'm not sure should be. So I will have Colin Morikawa to win this. California kid, that all helps. That all feeds into the narrative. And yeah, it'll buck that trend of, as you said, players winning their first major at the US Open. So Morikawa.
He also, I mentioned John Rahm can join Tiger Woods as the only other player to have won 2 West Coast majors. Colin Morikawa could also complete that feat should he win. I hope so for his sake, because I feel like I've been having the conversation for a while. You remain a believer. And I'm probably being overly harsh on a guy that's won 2 majors by his mid-20s. But I got some questions. I was shocked the other day to stumble across the official world golf rankings. Put as much credence into those as you will, but he currently sits 18th on that list, which is phenomenal for mine. He's not been relevant in majors for a little while. It's not really been relevant week in, week out on the PGA Tour for a little while. So, yeah, I hope so, because the game's more entertaining when he's striking the ball at his best. But, yeah, I think I put him on a little bit of a watch a while ago, and I've not necessarily seen anything that would make me think otherwise. So we'll see. I think your rationale is sound because of the fact that this is a rarely played course for a lot of these guys in the field. So it's sound rationale. It did lead you to last year's champion. So play on. Can I just say before we get to our roughie, neither of us have mentioned a guy by the name of Brooks Koepka. And look, I just think it's worth mentioning because I feel as though we do this every time. In our review of the PGA Championship, we both have the agreement that he is the best player of the modern era because majors are what you are measured by, and he won his 5th at the most recent major. Let me just rattle off a couple of things for you. Most rounds led or co-led in majors since 2017. Brooks Koepka 18 times he's led or co-led a round in a major since 2017. The next closest is Dustin Johnson at 8, Louis Oosthuizen at 7, Jordan Spieth at 6, and Kevin Kisner, surprisingly, at 6. So there's that. There's also, I stumbled across this just the other day, starting with his 2017 US Open victory at Erin Hills, Brooks Koepka has finished either first or second in 9 of the last 22 majors in which he's competed. That's a success rate of 41% for a top 2 finish for Brooks Koepka. I just think it's worth flagging because bookmark this. If on Monday night Brooks Koepka is the champion, we should not be surprised, and we should again put our hands up and say, why on earth did we not pick the man to win the major?
Yep, I totally agree. I mean, we said that we wouldn't ignore him again, but I think to win 2 in the 1 year is very, very difficult. It wouldn't surprise me. It certainly wouldn't surprise me if he did win. It's just so hard to know what the form line kind of looks like for the guys who we're not seeing week in, week out. I'm just trying to find who the last player was to win 2 majors in a year, and it might have actually it was Brooks himself back in 2018. So
yes.
That's and again, that was the PGA Championship and the US Open. So maybe who knows, he adds to the title list again this week at LA. I don't know though. We would look awfully stupid if we didn't mention him. So I'm glad you brought that up. Who's your roughie?
So I just want a few honourable mentions.
Okay.
Before I get to my actual roughie at either end of the spectrum. I think in terms of the too long spectrum, it'd be remiss of me not to mention the gentleman who I believe will be the highest finishing Australian, Cameron Davis, is currently paying $151. So in terms of make the cut or even a top 20, thanks very much for coming. And then in terms of probably too short, but just some players I think we should mention. So Max Homer's at $29. Max Homer, as I said, owns the course record, the North Course, the LA Country Club, is 61. He shot back in 2013. There's also a stat that I stumbled across the other day. From 6 PGA Tour events in California, the most top 10 finishes since the start of 2021-2022, Max Homer leads the way with 5 top 10 finishes, ahead of Rahm with 4, Cantlay, Jason Day, and Matt McNeely, Will Zalatoris, Sahith Theegala with 3, as well as Colin Morikawa with 3. Loves playing at home. Absolutely loves. He's won a Genesis or LA Open on one of George Thomas's other courses in Riviera. There's just a couple of things there for the homegrown lad. Obviously, he's way too short for a roughie at 29, but I think he's worth consideration. Also at 29, Tyrrell Hatton.
Yes.
Bloke's playing out of his skin at present. Genuinely out of his skin. Anytime you can sit alone with John Rahm in a stat is worth celebrating. And I stumbled across that the other day. Players ranked in the top 20 this season on PGA Tour in strokes gained off the tee, approach, and putting. There's only 2, John Rahm and Tyrrell Hatton. So put that in your black book. I also think the defending champion, no one's given that bloke a lick of attention at $31, but this is a course that sets up well for Matt Fitzpatrick. And the only other honourable mention I want to make is Tommy Fleetwood at 34, coming off a playoff loss at the Canadian Open. And again, a course that I think from a major perspective brings Tommy, or at least I shouldn't say brings Tommy back to the field, brings the field back to Tommy. So I think he's, maybe worth a little bit of investment at 34. None of those are my roughie.
Okay.
My roughie is a gentleman I just mentioned in a stat before, which is poor setup work for me.
Sure.
But he's currently paying $96. And that is Sahith Theegala.
Okay.
So I like Sahith. A couple of top 10s, as I mentioned, in Californian PGA Tour events. 3, in fact, in his last 6 starts there across 2021, 2022. Good all-round player. Power, control, accuracy. I think it'll be a matter of whether or not the putter's there. But I think this is the type of setup that suits him to the ground, to be honest, to stand up and perform in a major. He's not super long, doesn't have to be here. I think it's about minimizing the gap between floor and ceiling. So Heath, I think, is in terms of players, close to three figures at $96. I think he genuinely believes that Heath Gale will finish in the top 10 this week. So that's worth money alone in my mind at $96. Gamble responsibly.
I like it. All right, so my honourable mentions, just two guys that I'm always nervy of at majors, particularly here where length may be of a significant advantage, given that it is so wide. There's a lot of holes here where you can actually blow your drive onto other holes for better angles. For that reason, guys like Bryson and Dustin Johnson really just got a little asterisk next to them. Keep an eye on. Similarly, Tony Finau. I said Minwoo is going to be the lowest Australian. He's currently 111. So I will also add him to my little book here. A guy who's won at Riviera recently too, who very poor of us not to mention at $67 is Adam Scott, who won at Riviera not too long ago. Don't know whether he's going to get the chockies this week. I've gone a little bit shorter than your 96, so thank you for going for the genuine value. But Ricky Fowler, I think, is a genuine shot to be not maybe top 5, but I think top 10 material. All the form lines are trending in the right direction for Ricky. Striking the ball well. Again, putting was always the thing. That's certainly improved, but it's not the biggest issue here. So I'll have Ricky Fowler at 41 for my roughie for this one. I mean, there's so many guys here that I could absolutely make a case for. But I mean, Brian Harmon, 201 to 1. I always give out your punter Harmon. But there's a lot of guys here that I could give you. Even my last roughie, the last major, Adrian Moronks at 251 and probably ended up somewhere around that mark anyway. So I will have Ricky Fowler as my final tip.
So, two things I want to say to you about Ricky Fowler. I love that. Well, three things. I love that because I love Rick. I love that because he was, if you remember, in fact, my roughie for the PGA Championship. So consecutive majors, he's been nominated as a roughie out of the 19th Tee podcast. And I love that just because of the form he's in. So Ricky Fowler finished in the top 10 in all 4 major championships in 2014. Since 1970, he's the only player to have done that in a season and not won a major championship at any point in his career. It's a weird thing to tell me, Marshy. Why would you tell me that? I tell you that because where he's at now, in my mind, is as good as he's been playing since that portion of his career. So 2014, that's really probably peak Rick, and he's top 10 in all 4 major championships that year. The reason why, I believe, not just anecdotally, not just the eye test, not just watching it, have listened to a few of these numbers. This is comparatively 2022 to 2023. Strokes gained approach, he was 150th. He's 7th this year. Strokes gained putting, he was 161st. He's 49th. Greens in reg, 186th. He's 31st. Scoring average, 111th. He's 10th. Birdie average, 162nd. He's 15th. Strokes gained tee to green, he was 101st last year. He's 12th so far this year. The game is there, Drodes.
It is
absolutely there. So yeah. I love that. It's not $96, but it's not nothing either.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. Be a popular win.
Briefly, to finish off, I think it'd be worthwhile flagging a couple of groupings through the first 2 days. This is actually not something we ever really do, but I kind of looked at it today as like, why? I think this is just a good thing for people to be aware of going into the tournament. This is objective because everyone has their different favourite players, but for mine, some groupings that stand out. Shane Lowry, Justin Thomas, Tommy Fleetwood. That will be an interesting grouping for mine. Scotty gets Gary Woodland, previous champion, and Corey Connors, President's Cup teammate. Not much to talk about there because Corey didn't really contribute. Colin Morikawa, Max Homa, Scotty Scheffler will be a good group. Going down the list, Cameron Smith gets the defending champion Matt Fitzpatrick, and Sam Bennett, of course, the amateur who played incredibly well, the high finishing amateur, at Augusta National earlier this year. Brooks Koepka, Hideki Matsuyama, Rory McIlroy is a great group. Drewster, I'm just scrolling down now. There was one or two others that I had picked out. Phil Mickelson is playing alongside Podrick Harrington and Keegan Bradley. Tony Finau, Jordan Spieth, Patrick Cantlay. Not sure what Tony Finau and Jordan have done to deserve that. It'll be a 5.5 hour round. Minwoo Lee gets Davis Thompson and Justin Sa. And that is probably the only ones I felt like pulling out. Yeah, there's not too many else. Justin Rose, Ricky Fowler, Jason Day. That's a good group, actually.
Yes.
That's a good group. So just some interesting groupings there. Actually, Bryson DeChambeau, Francesco Molinari, Tyrrell Hatton. Imagine the conversation between Bryson and Tyrrell for 36 holes across 2 days. That will be fascinating.
I love it. Good addition to
just
the
some thoughts.
Good,
just some thoughts to end
good.
with.
They're good. They're good. They're good additions to the to these previews, I think, actually, because you often get some pretty interesting groupings.
Well, Trent, that'll do us. I think it'll be, as I said, like I'm as excited for this tournament as I've been for a men's major in some time. Of the firm belief that we'll look back on the course itself as the real winner on Monday night, but we will also have plenty of action to review. Enjoy. Stay tuned for our takes, as we always do. We do daily takes across the Instagram channel. And make sure, if you haven't already done so, to enter the competition. Your chance to win a pair of Oakley Sunnies and a box of Callaway balls. You just need to nominate who you think will be the highest finishing Australian. Their score, closest to without going over. Tag a friend, as well as the good folk at Oakley Australia on Instagram for your chance to go in the draw. We will announce our winner as part of our review show, recorded Monday evening in your ears early next week. Enjoy, Drews, the 123rd US Open from the Los Angeles Country Club. Stay safe. Hit them straight.